In an exclusive interview with Sky News Northern Australia correspondent Matt Cunningham, the Morrison government's Indigenous Minister Ken Wyatt had this to say regarding the contentious issue of an Indigenous voice to the Parliament.
I want to be very clear. The question we put to the Australian people will not result in what some desire, and that is an enshrined voice to the Parliament. On these two matters, whilst related, they needed to be treated separately. This is about recognising Indigenous Australians on our birth certificate.
Now, those of you who don't believe we unite Australians by dividing them on the basis of their skin colour, you might take comfort in that statement. Good, you say, this idea of a body set up to second-guess the laws of the Parliament just for members of one particular race doesn't belong in a free and fair country like ours. Good, you say? If you said that, you'd be wrong. Because what Ken Wyatt has just said in that speech and in his interview with Matt Cunningham is that the voice is going ahead, but because they know they won't be able to get the people to vote for it in a constitutional referendum, they'll just join with Labor and legislate it anyway. Be very careful here, Prime Minister. Going around the people and putting legislation through the Parliament without ordinary voters having their say on an issue they feel very strongly about is precisely why the New South Wales government is in a self-inflicted crisis over abortion laws. If this idea of an Indigenous voice to Parliament is such a sound and sensible change, take it to an election or put it up as an official referendum question. But by not doing either of these things, it shows you know it won't be supported by the majority of Australians. And if not supported by the people in a democracy, it shouldn't go ahead. Back on the 16th of July, when this whole issue first surfaced after a speech to the National Press Club by Wyatt, I said this here on Credlin. I said, when Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the government has no plans to establish a Makarrata Commission, a kind of parallel Indigenous government, I believe him, even though it was one of the demands made in the Voice from the Heart statement at Uluru last year. Likewise, I said, back in July, I said I believe the PM when he says that a constitutionally entrenched or even merely legislated Indigenous voice to the Parliament is not government policy. And I said that because that is what I was told. Yet here is the Minister in Matt Cunningham's exclusive last night.
No, I haven't ruled that out at all, Matt. A commission of some description will exist. And certainly I like the terminology around Makarrata.
You think you're being snowed here? So do I. Let's not forget that the whole business of this new push was restarted by Wyatt before the recent May election, but certainly not disclosed in the campaign to any of us. After the Morrison government was re-elected, it came to light that Wyatt, in his former role as chair of the Joint Standing Committee on Indigenous Recognition, had actually gone as far as having a bill drafted to establish this Makarrata Commission before the election, but didn't tell you about it. Now, I've been around too long in politics to believe any of this is a coincidence. If ministers like Wyatt and other supporters of a separate Indigenous body want to persist, put it to the vote with the people, and if I'm right, they'll give you one hell of a reality check, because in every state and territory, Australians reject the idea that we divide this country based on the colour of somebody's skin. And whether or not your ancestors arrived 200 years ago, whether they were here when people arrived, or whether they arrived yesterday. Last month I said that once the government realises that any constitutional change to enshrine an Indigenous voice will fail because it divides Australians rather than unites us, some will want to just legislate it through the Parliament and avoid the people. And here we are tonight with the Minister himself proving me right. Legislating a voice to the Parliament, going around the Australian people to have one group of Australians consider laws in addition to the work of our parliamentarians, is not who we are. What this will mean is two separate electoral rolls, one for Indigenous Australians only and one for the rest of us. Is that what the quiet Australian really voted for in May? I know the Prime Minister won't want to slap down his Indigenous minister, at least in public, But if Wyatt's ideas actually do go much further, and if the government tries to ram through legislation on an Indigenous voice without the rest of Australia getting their say, there will be deep trouble for the Morrison government.